to the Creativity Conference's official podcast. My name is Aidan Rhode, and in this podcast, I'll be discussing all aspects of creativity with some world-class creative minds who we are lucky enough to have joining us as speakers for the conference. Today, I am joined by Aidan Rhode, who is an award-winning musician, composer, and writer based in LA, who gave some wonderful talks for us back in August and January 2021. Aidan, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
Good. I feel like maybe I feel a little bit like I had a verbal, palm frond being waved at me as I feeding me grapes. Anyway, I'm fine.
Speaking of the conferences last year, how did you find being at the conference? Did you manage to attend any other sessions?
I attended a bunch and the sort of interdisciplinary experience of hearing how different people work and I was really glad to see how much of a kind of I don't know what I call very loosely sort of a spiritual approach that a lot of people seem to have. Like, it was good to see so many people who really had thought about what they're doing in a kind of larger context, the meaning of being a creator and the meaning of even how what you believe can affect in a positive way your process. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and you were on the music panel as well with a few others like Jonathan Bird and Louisa
hmm
Winters, and I enjoyed dipping in and out of that session. And speaking of them, I've had Jonathan and Louisa and a few other of our musician speakers on the podcast, and one question that has come up a few times that was highlighted by Louisa is about whether academic formal music training is quashing creativity in a way, because it teaches you set ways of doing things and limits potential imagination. What is your take on that, on the formal side of musical training?
Was not formally trained, so I guess I'm the person who can say. I mean, I suppose I'm a case where I talk about my creativity being almost overwhelming at times. Like, I've been writing songs, like written 4 or 5 songs in the last couple weeks, and I'm like, I can't keep up in terms of what I actually produce and put out into the world. By like, it's not even the difference of what I put out to what I'm creating kind of privately is so extreme that it sometimes stresses me out. And that, who knows, there may be some connection to the fact that I didn't have formal training. I don't feel the pressure of doing things the right way. I mean, I did learn some rules. I learned, I know chords and have some sense of theory. I took one class, but I certainly wasn't, trained in a kind of, in the way that I think those people are talking about. So I think it can go both ways. I mean, I think ideally, what I have often been, I don't know, jealous or resentful that I didn't get that training because it's made a lot of things more difficult for me. Like when I actually, film scoring, for example, or even like writing arrangements. It's a sort of brick by brick experience for me, and I tend to be very slow because I know what I have in my head, but I don't have the tools that training has to put those across quickly. So, I think there's, typically the idea that the best thing is to have the training and then just forget the training. But I think it's true that a lot of people, I think there's a range between sort of introductory and mastery where it's probably hard to where the training actually becomes like a monkey on people's back. So I think if you can get to mastery, it's probably wonderful because then you're free again, but you have these incredible tools. Or you're somebody like me who doesn't have the training, and so I have a view of it, but I've managed to, I guess, train myself, and I think it's fairly common, and certainly in the rock world that people didn't have any kind of formal training, and I learned by playing with a lot of musicians growing up. Basements, a lot of loud music in basements, and whichever instrument was available. So I would play keyboards or guitar or bass or drums, depending you know, who was there and who wasn't there, and we'd switch around, and that was like my training really, for part of it. But the for me as a songwriter, the training happens. It's more of a private experience, and I trying to honor the muses, and so I do have a kind of I don't know, a sense of seriousness, and like there is something I'm trying to honor, but it's not somebody else's rules. It's like what I hear when I'm in bed or whatever, and then it's like, okay, did I get that right? Did I, you know, or I'm developing something that I came through inspiration, and then there's a lot of work. Like, am I honoring? You know, I may not have dreamed an entire piece of music, but how can a whole piece of music honor the sort of spirit that I did dream? You know, so that's a lot of in a way, I guess I say that to say that it's not just like a kind of free for all sort of floating, do what I, you know, do whatever I want experience. You know, there is a rigor to it that kicks in, I guess is my point. So it's like, I guess the Dylan thing, you've got to serve somebody. So I'm not serving my academic teachers, but I am serving someone. So
Right. And when you're dreaming these songs, how do you find the process of harnessing these dreams, these unconscious thoughts, and you know, manifesting them into real music?
I find it's my favorite thing to do. So maybe that's why it happens a lot, because I like it, and I also honor it by. I've gotten better at honoring it by getting right up, and sometimes it's like, oh, fuck. Like I really want to sleep some more, but here I am, and it's 4 in the morning, and sometimes it's like a fish. Sometimes it's like, you know what, I'm throwing this one back. I know there's something here, and I've just got to sleep, and I go back to sleep. But more often than not, I you know, haul myself out of bed and go to the piano, and then it's like, you know, if anybody's tried to write down dreams or whatever, it's similar to that. You try in a sort of like wisps of vapor. They go away pretty quickly, and so. But I've gotten better at holding on, like ingesting those wisps into my, you know, conscious mind, so that as I'm carrying a song, usually now I try to finish it, but before I do anything else, and sometimes it'll take me 6 hours, you know. So at noon, I'm like, you know, working on pronouns in the song or whatever, like working on these sort of the details that sometimes I get stuck on at the very end, like, oh, should I say this in the first person or the second person, and that kind of stuff. But I've gotten better at kind of jumping right into it, whereas I used to like maybe catalog ideas, and then it would be this massive, like, you know, 70 hours of like snippets of ideas, and I would know I would want to finish a song, and it's harder when you get out of the zone to get back into it. So I try to stay in that sort of partial liminal dream state, so I can remember what the spirit of it was, and that becomes when in doubt, like I remember the feeling, because as we all know, there's always a feeling. It's like a soundtrack in a movie. Like somebody could be walking, you know, like a score. Like somebody could walk across a room. It's a meaningless act. Whatever. It's a sort of very standard action, but the music tells you what the feeling of it is, and so we all know in dreams that there can be neutral activities, but they can feel like nightmares, or feel hopeful, or feel erotic, or feel whatever, based on there's some kind of sense that we just know, not necessarily through hearing music in the dream, but through just, it's part of the experience of dreaming. I think we know what kind of a dream we're in when we're in it. You know, the content itself is just content. So I try to remember that feeling while I'm working, and that becomes a guide when there, you know, because often usually it's not the entire thing. I have kernels of it, but I have the feeling, and so the waking process is a matter of staying in that zone while slowly bringing the rational brain on board. This is kind of what my January, I guess it was January 21. That was sort of what my lecture, if we can call it that, my talk was about that process. So
And is this dream catching a skill that can be, practiced and improved upon and learned over time, or is this just something that it just sort of happens and you have no control over it?
I think anything can be learned over time. I mean, I may have been predisposed to it because of family trauma leading to or contributing to a disposition towards insomnia. So that sleep was, I kind of, to be honest, was sort of sleeping with one eye open for a lot of my youth. And so I think I got used to kind of being between wake and sleep. And but I also was having I was having a lot of nightmares when I was really, really little. And I wrote those down. In fact, some of the first things I ever like wrote on paper, I think when I was quite young, like 4 or something, there was this journal of these stories that I wrote, which were very dream based. So anyway, there's a predisposition perhaps, and then, but I certainly nurtured it. I mean, life nurtured it upon me to be kind of, I don't know, spending a lot of my hours of existence in that sort of partial state. But then also, I've certainly nurtured it now that once it became sort of part of my creative process, I've embraced that space. But I think everybody can learn. I think most people can learn most things, but it's a question of whether you have the time or make the time, or, and there are some people might be oriented one way or the other. So, but I believe anybody can. If anybody wants to, they probably already have it in them. So, probably the most important thing is just to start doing it. Start writing down even just the simple thing of having a pad by your bed and writing down the first things when you first wake up, rather than going to the dreaded phone, which just totally obliterates any individuality. So I try to avoid those in general. Technology and all the social networking world that we're in, I find it really feels like it's like takes the ocean of somebody's own depth and uniqueness and whatever whales and, chicken fish or whatever might be in their unique sea, and it's like drops depth charges that just churn the water and then you're just floating and trying to find. I'm carrying this metaphor. I'm gonna carry this metaphor out, but it's like you're just like trying to find shore, trying to find something to hold on to. And this is why. I mean, I have a rough relationship with social media. People are often telling me I need to do more with it, and I just find it absolutely destroys the water that I'm in. And so I try to get in and maybe do what I have to do or feel like I should do and get out as quickly as possible. But certainly when you wake up in the morning, the habit of so many people have, including me a lot of times, where it's like grabbing the phone, even if it's like the clock's on there, you're already beware of that thing. We all know this, but
Yes, it is a definite drain on a lot of things: time,
yeah,
energy,
yeah,
life force, mental wellness for so many
yeah.
people. Your brother Ari is also a very accomplished creative in his own right. Is an award-winning filmmaker, director. Does he have the same sort of disposition as you do? And what was it like growing up together? Were you always creating projects and making things together as kids, or was this something that developed later on in life?
He is not like me in that regard. I mean, he's certainly very devoted to his filmmaking, and his vision, and wants to. But I think he's more. I don't know, he's definitely more extroverted than I am. He's more, and I think in the sort of, I don't know if this is the Myers-Briggs idea or the original Jungian idea, but he in the sense of I think this is one of the original senses of extroversion versus introversion, but he gets energy from other people and finds himself like lit up energetically, like socially, but also I think creatively. Whereas I find when I'm around other people, I feel myself shrinking more and more. And when I'm alone, I tend to feel more comfortable, and I also find my creativity is like, you know, I, I don't have any, it's completely unblocked. And so I think the dream thing is a kind of almost an extreme version of introversion, like the well of creative force that I have. It gets deeper the further away I am from like waking life and stuff like having to function in the daily world or deal with other people. So yeah, but he's much more of a kind of social guy and a fun-loving type personality. But so yeah, we did do a few like Super 8 films that he made that I contributed to, playing with like little fangy wangles, these little kind of rubber, I don't know, finger frights or whatever these. So he made some films as a kid, and I was generally writing songs, but it was very much a private thing for me if I had a moment where nobody was around. So yeah, it's interesting. We've collaborated. I've scored his feature films and most of his shorts, and he's done some of my. He's done a few of my music videos. He's directed. I've directed my own videos as well, which is what I'm talking about in the August talks. But yeah, so it's an interesting thing to two people in the same family, both creative, but kind of deal with their creativity differently. He would be able to give you a better answer about his own process. I'm sort of describing it to you through the lens of how it's different from mine. But one thing I do observe is he certainly like loves to have co-writers and loves to work with. It's why, as a director in a way, it's a very collaborative process. Often, you're building a team of people and actors and reacting and so I think it's probably why he was drawn to that as his art form.
Your most recent album, Earth City One, it's an excellent album. I really enjoyed sort of listening to bits and pieces of it. And it's sort of a part one of a trilogy of albums. Tell me more about the process creatively of making this trilogy of albums and how they all sort of interlink together.
Well, I'm getting into production on part two right now. So it's mostly written. I have a few, more songs. I have more songs than the main thing now in terms of the writing is choosing which songs are going to make the cut, which is a somewhat painful process for me because I love them all. But, for me, I think I really want music to be an art form that gets full attention again, and it's become, because of just lifestyle and social media again, and just the modern world, also the way people listen on streaming platforms, it's become more of a sort of passive art form, in that people put on stuff while they're listening, and the algorithm, based on their preferences, and the algorithm feeds them music. And I think in a way declared a trilogy as a way of going more the other direction, towards like, hey, there is a larger story I'm telling, and it's not a story in terms of like characters, but it's a story in terms of some big themes that I'm wanting to address that are partly addressed in the songs, but there's a kind of bigger picture thing that I'm trying to say, and it's I think I've always actually been weirdly drawn to trilogies as a way of expressing of unrolling my music, and I didn't have the courage to actually do it. There were prior things, like I did a record, Song from a Toxic Apartment, that I think I struggled with for a long time, a lot more than I would have if I had just wanted to, because it started as this weird, crazy trilogy of its own about this like offensive heavy metal band, and there was this whole story. And anyway, I ended up just extracting that album out of this larger idea that I was trying to take on and sort of didn't know how to. But in this case, I said, you know what, I actually do want to tell this bigger story about how we're all living as a society and how our civilization has alienated us from each other and from the natural world. And so Earth City is a metaphor, the idea of the whole Earth as a city. And it's so anyway, the part one that just came out is in a way the most kind of contemplative part, and it's but I'm excited for the journey of parts 2 and 3, and I know where I'm going, but I won't reveal too much. So so my listeners can be, but it's connected thematically, but it's definitely each record has its own flavor for sure.
You mentioned the natural world, like that's a huge part of a lot of your music is, and your whole sort of ethos is this appreciation for nature and the environment, and it's clearly very important to you. We've had Michael Bernier in a previous episode was talking about how he believes nature. He's a designer, and he believes that nature is the perfect designer or the perfect partner of creativity, and that sort of Mother Nature is just the epitome of all creativity. There's no one better than her. What do you think about that?
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, it's kind of almost like what I was saying about the dream thing, but we have something to contribute to. We, humans. For example, I love music. There is sound but we organize sound in a way that is different from nature, the way nature does. So, I certainly, from on the sound side of things, I love what humans do, but I, I do feel that we have lost our way in terms of losing the connection to the natural world, and I think it's a source of a lot of the depression or just sense that something is not quite right that a lot of people go through most of their life with, in a way that's kind of an undercurrent of what this album Earth City One, the longing. There's this longing. It's not. There's some undercurrents of longing for nature, but it's not explicit on part one. I think partly it's a lot of there's you are getting the hints. You're picking up on the hints in there, but I think a lot of the longing that people have for connection would have been filled by a connection to nature, but having lost that connection, there's this hole that we try to fill with romance or even family and nation, and there's all of these kind of ways of building identity and a sense of connection, which are important. But there's a bigger one that got kind of knocked out by technology, agricultural technology or whatever, 15,000 years ago. But it's like when we left Earth and entered, the city, the world of what we created. It's safer, maybe in some ways. Maybe we can live longer. Certainly, it's safer from like tigers or whatever. But there's some fundamental stuff that got left behind, and so yeah, I'd like to see more of Bernier's work.
His talk in August was really excellent, and he actually had COVID while he was presenting, but he still delivered a fantastic session despite being a
Wow.
little under the weather. Um, and of all the projects that you've worked on over the years in your extensive career, are there any projects in particular that you've worked on that you're particularly proud of and have a bit of a soft spot for, but that you deem maybe unappreciated or that you wish more people were aware of?
I'm gonna say Earth City. Honestly, the thing I'm working on now on the album that I just put out is meant to be. Some of the other stuff that I've done is, I will admit, I have. I would have to be some kind of fantasist to think that some of those records would have any kind of mass appeal because they're deeply, they're strange. I've done put out some strange stuff that I love and I feel very close to. But this album is designed, and this trilogy is designed to have an effect on the culture. And so I want it to be heard, and it's in process right now. And so so it's near to my heart right now, and it's so I hope people will join me on it.
And outside of all your music making, are there any creative outlets that you have that keep you creatively fulfilled, but at a sort of a break from the music?
Fulfillment can come from many things. There's some things that I've gotten into snorkeling. I love going to local mom and pop restaurants. Is definitely a break from music to just go and let somebody's creativity and food be something that I can enjoy. I really like the sort of hole in the walls. It's one of the things I like about living in a city is that there's all these people doing their dreams in an art form that's not mine, and I consider making a restaurant an art form. So that's sort of like a little hobby for me that is away from music. I've also started writing poetry. A couple years ago, I got tinnitus working on a film, actually, and was in pretty bad shape about that for a while, and didn't think I was going to be able to do music anymore, and kind of stumbled into a little bit of a poetry community in LA, here in the east side of LA, and there's actually fairly vibrant poetry scene here, which is something that I never thought I would find, and even just wasn't even on my radar to even think about. And so I have started writing poetry, and I've published a few things in the last year, which is exciting. And just like a couple publications of published things. I haven't put a book out or anything, but so that's another, and it's a very different thing from songwriting. Like the stuff that comes out in the poetry is nothing like my music in terms of the energy. It's like a different element of, and that's actually something I recommend to all creatives. Have things that are not, like have hobbies, but also trying something totally different. It's definitely like a different energy, and so that's kind of cool. Like it tends to be more wild and rage filled than my music, and it's anyway, it's like a different thing. It's like a different spirit that comes through with the poetry. So, yeah.
Interesting. And one of our speakers in January and possibly August as well, actually, Soren Stockman is a very accomplished poet and literature expert, and he gave some fantastic talks, sort of going through some poetry and just breaking it down, which I really enjoyed. Well, one final question before we wrap up here. I ask everybody the same question at the end of every podcast episode, and it's quite a broad one, but easy to ask, maybe difficult to answer concisely. But simply, to you as a creative, what does creativity mean?
For me, it means allowing one's own energies, spirit, whatever, to emerge into the world. For me, that's what it is. And I do feel that creativity can take literally any form. I mean, I think about somebody who drives a bike. I take buses in LA, which is something that a lot of people like. I don't know many people who take the bus, but so I think about bus drivers because I encounter them. But I think about how somebody can do something in a way that brings their own spirit into what they do. And I think you could do literally anything creatively, bringing that fundamental life force of love and spirit and whatever your unique thing is. And also, people can do those things uncreatively. And so I honor anybody who does anything that they are doing, and brings that energy into it. You know, literally, they could be, you can think of what the most, seemingly banal activity, but if you do it with the spirit, then it's absolutely creative. For me, that's my view. I happen to be doing something that's more sort of has a reputation as being creative, but I would also listen to a lot of the music on the radio right now and say that that's not creative at all. That's an aside, but I think my point is that you can do anything creatively, including art, and you can do art not creatively, and people can do bricklaying creatively. And that's not to say messing up the bricklaying. You can do it accurately, but bring spirit into it, and then it's, for me, creative, even if your creativity is in doing it really well, doing a really good job, is, for me, something to be honored, whatever you're doing.
I absolutely agree, and very, very eloquently put. That's all the time that we have for this episode, but thank you so much for joining me, Ethan.
Thank you, Aidan.
It's been a pleasure to have you, and yeah, check out some of Ethan's previous conference talks and panels, and of course his latest album, Earth City One: The Longing. And yeah, I look forward to speaking again.
Likewise.